In this video, I want to kind of branch off from the previous video where I was talking about Prusa, their new Mark IV, and, could it compete in today's kind of 3D printer landscape? And I want to talk a little bit about why it is so hard to compete in the consumer 3D printer landscape, the way things are currently. And we're going to be talking a lot about Chinese manufacturing, and it would be very easy, and I think most people actually would just default to, well, you can't compete because of the cheaper labor costs and because, intellectual property isn't protected very well. And so these Chinese companies just steal IP and they have very cheap labor costs and that's it. But there's actually quite a bit more than that to it about why it's so difficult to compete with Chinese 3D printers. And so I want to talk a little bit in this video about the geography of 3D printing and logistics and what goes into, why companies are located where they are. And I want to look a little bit at, where all these 3D printers come from and kind of why it is that way. And so to start off, I'm here in Google Earth and I have some pins drop on some manufacturers that are located in the United States. Now, these are the headquarter pins, but I do also want to kind of break out where things are made is not always where the company is headquartered. Specifically, when we talk about Formlabs, they do not actually manufacture their 3D printers here in the United States. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. So I've only got a few companies here because really when you talk about consumer 3D printers, almost nothing is made in the United States. I've got a pin on Stratasys because they're maybe the largest name in all of 3D printing, clearly not a consumer-oriented machine. Now, if I wanted to drop other pins of that class of machine, yes, there would be more in the United States. But really, when you look at the United States and the popular or known 3D printer brands that a consumer might bump into or see out there consider, really, it's probably Lulzbot for filament 3D printers and Formlabs. Now, Lulzbot is in Fargo. They used to manufacture in Denver, but then the company kind of went under and they were purchased by a company in Fargo. And as you zoom in here, you will see it pop up, Lulzbot here is now their headquarters, Fargo 3D Printer Repair, located in the same building, because they got bought out. And so I don't actually know if they're still made in Denver. I think now they have moved manufacturing, but this is where they're located now, again, in Fargo, North Dakota. Now, next up, Formlabs, headquartered basically in Boston. This is their main headquarters. However, it's worth noting, like I said earlier, Formlabs actually does not manufacture here. And when we go over to Asia, we'll see that they actually have offices all over the world, but their manufacturing is primarily in China. But now, before I move over there, one thing I do want to mention about Formlabs and Lulzbot and why you really don't see them much is that they're not very economical. So here are Lulzbot's listed 3D printers, and they do have some new models that seem cheaper. I haven't heard of these before. Now, I don't keep up with Lulzbot because they're not very popular. But they do have some cheaper stuff. This Sidekick is about, it's kind of mini-sized. It's a very small build plate, and they have a few different editions. The largest, the 747, its build plate is reasonable, 9 by 9 by 9¼ inches, or about 230 millimeters squared. But they're really known more for their Taz Pro and Workhorse, and you can see that these are quite expensive 3D printers. Again, they are made in the United States, but you are paying a pretty significant premium. So I would say, again, these are not necessarily consumer-oriented. This one's called the Workhorse because, again, it's more for kind of very reliable, kind of more production 3D printing for somebody that's maybe using it like a business. Similarly, when you go over to Formlabs, the Form 3 Plus is their cheapest machine. Now, this is a resin 3D printer, $2,500 for what is not the biggest build volume in the world. Again, if you're familiar with resin 3D printing, this is a fairly small build volume. Now, they do use SLA, and so they are using a different technology. It is a little bit more expensive. But again, their cheapest model, $2.5 grand, and from there it gets real expensive. If you go up to the Form 3L, it's big, but it costs $9 grand, and then you're into medical specialty 3D printers, The Form 3BL, again, this is more of a production healthcare thing. It's $13,000. Or you go up to the Fuse 1, which is an SLS machine, and now you're up to $28,000. So clearly they're kind of high-end prosumer into commercial machines here. And that is kind of the trend in the United States. You really only see commercial machines for the most part that are manufactured in the United States. And part of the reason is those machines typically have patent coverage. So one of the reasons I dropped in Stratasys is they've had a patent on heated build chambers for a long time, and that protected some market share for them. Now, as that expires, and I think it has expired now. Yeah, that patent expired in 2021, so we may start seeing some cheaper, less expensive 3D printers now being made with heated chambers, specifically because, well, now they don't have patent protection. And so that's a big advantage. Again, in this upper end, you're mostly not focused on consumer printers where the technology is kind of open and widespread and everybody can do the same thing. You're focused more on innovation, high-end, bigger money machines to justify the production costs to locate here in the United States. So over in Europe, I've just got a couple of pins dropped because, again, I'm only aware of a few 3D printer brands that come out of Europe that are really focused on consumer machines. I talked a little bit and I threw some shade at Ultimaker in my previous video. Their main manufacturing facility is located in a town called Zaltbommel. I'm sure I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but here is the Ultimaker basically factory in the Netherlands. They do have a headquarters in a different area, but this is really where they're mostly made, although I do think they also have some manufacturing in the United States, possibly in Asia, to serve those markets in particular. It's also worth noting that some of their parts are obviously sourced from Asia. I believe their control boards, specifically the PCBs, are actually coming from Asia. And then, of course, in Prague, we have Prusa Research. And so here is the Prusa facility. Now, they tend to make almost everything they can themselves, and they also try to really source locally. So let me flip over to the 3D view here. And you can actually see when we go into 3D view here that on the side of the building here, Prusa Lab, right? And so they really do make a lot of stuff here. As a matter of fact, in one of the recent videos, they even showed that they make their own PCBs now, or at least they're populating them. I don't know if they're having the PCB etched here at this facility, but they're at least doing the pick and place in their own facility. They 3D print a lot of their own parts, so they are pretty much dedicated to more local manufacturing, and I've heard them even talk about, attempting to get things sourced as locally as possible for their manufacturing. Now, apart from that, I could go into like Zortrax, which is from Poland, but again, typically that's not really consumer focused. Their machines are very expensive. Again, you're looking at north of $2,000 for them. Even Ultimaker these days, I would say, is not really consumer focused. But you can get, sub $3,000 for the Ultimaker 2 Plus, again, and then it just gets much more expensive from there. So I would say that they are really not targeting regular consumers anymore. They're focused more on like commercial and prototype work, and so their machines are and have gotten quite expensive compared to most of the consumer-oriented machines that we're going to be talking about. So now we're going to move on to Asia. Kind of look at where things are made. I also did drop a pin, by the way, that Stratasys did get bought out by a company in Israel, and they have two headquarters, one in the United States and one in Israel, so I did drop a pin on that just for reference. So now off to Asia, and here's where we really start to come to some of the main points that I'm going to be making about 3D printing and why things are the way they are. And the first thing you'll notice is whenever we talk about Asian 3D printers and the brands that you know of, we're really not talking about Asia. We're not even really talking about China. What we're going to be talking about is Shenzhen, because the only two pins I've got dropped here are Qidi, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, and that's located here in like the Wenzhou area of China. And then you have like in resin 3D printing Phrozen, which is in Taiwan. And so there are a few companies that you'll probably know of that aren't in Shenzhen. And so I did try to drop a pin on some of the bigger ones. I think there's also one that I can't remember the name of right offhand that is located over in Hubei. And there are some other, especially like resin manufacturers or some of the filament producers that are located around Shanghai or in Taiwan. But once we get into Shenzhen, you'll start to see that really 3D printing has a very, very small footprint as far as its manufacturing in the world. And there's a reason for that. So here we are in Shenzhen, and I just want to point out all of the 3D printers that you will find located and headquartered and manufactured in this one metropolitan area. So we've got Creality, which is headquartered in Hong Kong, right? You've got Bambu Lab right here. You've got Formlabs actually being made in Shenzhen, even though they have headquarters in the United States. Longer 3D, Tronxy, BigTreeTech, Elegoo, Creality, Sovol. What else do we have? Anet, Anycubic, right? And it's not just that they're kind of all in one town. They're all very, very close here. If we pull up the measurement tool here, and we kind of draw a line from here all the way across, you're looking at 50 kilometers. So that's roughly like 30 miles east to west, 50 kilometers east to west. If you go north to south, right, roughly the same distance, but I mean, a lot of this just is Creality here. So if we do it, really Shenzhen proper, 30 kilometers. So you're looking at, again, 20 miles. And all of these companies locate in this one area. And the reason is there's a thing called an agglomeration economy in economics. An agglomeration economy is this thing in economics that they talk about whenever business industries start to locate in one area, where it becomes easier to continue expanding production even of other companies in that area. And so the Wikipedia here, the economies of agglomeration, is in broad terms how agglomeration occurs in locations where cost savings can naturally arise. And it's basically where, you get these urban clusters of similar businesses, and it's kind of like an economy of scale because so many productive manufacturers locate in the same area that all kind of do similar stuff, that they have to compete with each other. There's a huge supply of similarly skilled labor, and all that kind of locates in one area over time. Detroit used to be like this for automobile manufacturing here in the United States. Silicon Valley for software and tech research was a big agglomeration economy for a long time. And you see kind of, where does this stuff come from? What are the benefits? Well, low transport costs, right? Physical proximity to other firms and centers of production minimize transportation costs because it's all kind of right there. Geographic advantages can be a thing where a specific geography may have an advantage for production, such as, if the mining is located close for the minerals that you need, or wine industries may concentrate where there's geographic advantages for rainfall. Coffee and chocolate are all often concentrated into certain geographies. Labor pooling, because again, you get a skilled labor force in an area, so it's easy to hire people for your business. If they already have those skills, you don't have to train them as much. It reduces your training costs. And then knowledge spillovers. You see other people developing similar stuff in the same area, and it makes it easier for you to have ideas that spin off of those ideas, right? Knowledge generation, diffusion, and accumulation happen in an area as people see each other. They're in, little industry get-togethers, or they meet up in the city, and they talk about what they're doing at the bar and stuff like that. Formerly, furniture manufacturing in the United States used to largely be located in North Carolina a lot because, again, you get a lot of skilled labor that starts to be located in that area. A lot of the equipment, service and dealers and all that other stuff gets located in that area. And so it lowers the cost to do things. And this is basically what has happened with Shenzhen because, as cell phones began to grow, a lot of that manufacturing back in the 90s and 2000s really grew in this area, and so it became this gigantic electronics manufacturing hub. And so it just makes a lot of sense that if you're going to be manufacturing electronics, that you make it here, because it's going to be cheaper to prototype, it's going to be cheaper to manufacture, there's going to be skilled, trained labor already here. All the parts that you need are largely manufactured in this area. I've got a couple pins dropped for that. There's a company here that makes aluminum extrusions. And so if you're thinking about frames and the components for, structures, there are hundreds of companies that manufacture aluminum extrusions in the Guangzhou area in Shenzhen. If you want to do injection molded parts, well, there are tons of companies in this area that do injection molding. And the tool and die makers who make those molds, there's tons of those people here. There's a company called Tokomotion up here that makes all kinds of linear motion and robotics mechanisms. You've got, if you want your PCBs, well, typically in consumer stuff, like if you want to order a PCB, you'll see tons of stuff on YouTube about ordering from JLCPCB. Well, it's located right here in the middle of Shenzhen. One of the other big ones is PCBWay, which is also located in Shenzhen. And that's just the ones that serve the internet, right? I mean, that's not all the industrial PCB manufacturers that are here. On Semiconductor manufactures a lot of their stuff here. And whenever I dug into one of my old Anycubic boards, and again, Anycubic is headquartered right up here, just down the street, again, and you're looking at a distance here, from Anycubic to the On Semiconductor plant here is less than 18, 19 kilometers, where a lot of the MOSFETs for like the heated bed and to, heat the hot end, those MOSFETs that are located on Anycubic's control board are manufactured by onsemi, and a lot of onsemi's production of those MOSFETs is located frickin' 15 miles down the road. If you look at the talent of like engineering that is located in this area, Foxconn that manufactures, iPhones and all kinds of other, very intensive high-tech, very precise electronics is located right here, right? You've got this big, huge manufacturing facility for Foxconn, and lo and behold, just spitting distance away, you've got Sovol, Creality, Elegoo, and BigTreeTech, which is also the producer of BIQU, all just located right here in the same area of Shenzhen. It's pretty well known that a lot of Bambu Labs founders and engineers came from DJI, the drone manufacturer. Well, DJI is located just right over here, and this pin is not exact because I couldn't get an exact placement of where their headquarters is. But DJI makes their stuff here in Shenzhen, and their headquarters is here in Shenzhen. So sure enough, Bambu Labs makes their stuff in Shenzhen, and they have a headquarters in Shenzhen. And some of the stuff that I've talked about, again, it's not just the labor costs. The sourcing of materials is so easy in this area because so many things are manufactured in this area. There are huge electronics open markets that you just walk into and buy almost any electrical component or hardware component for a 3D printer that you could ever want. And here's one of the largest ones, this place called the Seg Electronics Market. So I've actually gone into the regular map here to show you the Seg Electronic Market simply because it would appear that something is up with Google's satellite here. You can see it's kind of weird the way this thing is all blurry, and I think there's just something going on with their imagery. And so I've had to go back over to the regular view to show you kind of the layout. So there's a huge building right here that's at the bottom of it is called the Seg Electronics Market. It's one of the largest open electronics markets in the world. Now in this building, and it's not a small building, and here's a picture just to show you. Yes, it is a bit phallic, but it's actually a rather large building. And one thing to point out is the bottom 10 floors are all electronics market. And so if you look at pictures of this place and you look at the inside, it's just crammed with people selling everything. And I mean, again, multiple floors of all kinds of stuff. And so I'm here on a website called the 7 Electronics because they actually have like a walkthrough of the entire building, and they go through all these floors, and you can kind of get an image of all the different things that they have available. And so they actually have all the stuff broken out on signs. Here you can see that, the first and second floor, electronics components, instruments, connectors, tools, battery, power, LCD devices, LEDs, packaging. Level 2, components, instruments, connectors, tools, LED, projector barcodes, batteries, power, data line security, UAV, digital products. Level 3, network communication, vehicle navigation, checkout systems. Level 4, tablet PCs, right? You can just see like every floor even has dedicated, here's what you will find on that floor. And you look at all the vendors, level 5 and 6, CPUs, motherboards, graphics cards, memories, hard disk displays, industrial control equipment, storage devices, 7 through 10, accessories of computer and mobile phones, right? All kinds of power adapters, Bluetooth, audio converters, warehousing, DIY, just all kinds of stuff, all in this one place, and there's 10 floors of it. And in this one area town, you can see there's not just one of these places. There's like dozens of these gigantic open markets that anybody can walk into and buy almost anything that you want, for components, for prototyping, everything. And it's all right there because it's all being made right there. And so I'm sure you're all familiar with like Alibaba, where you can just order all this stuff. You can also come to a website called Made in China that allows you to actually dig to the location of where you want your stuff supplied from. And I just wanted to show you like how easy it is to find things that you might use to prototype or manufacture 3D printers. So again, let's say that you want something like, power supplies. So you type in power supplies, and then you can scroll down over here. Let's say that we want diamond members. Let's say that we want audited suppliers because we're scared because we're, buying stuff from China. And so we come down and you'll see that the biggest listing for power supply manufacturers, and by the way, you can even specify, do you want a trading company, a group, an individual, or a manufacturer? So let's say we actually want a factory. You come down and look, 23,000 listings. Now, multiple of these are from the same companies. I'm not saying there's 23 or 24,000 companies, but the largest suppliers come out of Shenzhen. And so, you want cheap PSUs, you're going to be able to find them in the same town. You're not going to have to ship them over the ocean. You're not even going to have to ship them across country. Literally, you could drive over there and probably pick this crap up the same day. If you want linear rails, and again, let's say that we want audited suppliers, diamond members, gold, you come down here and now look, Shenzhen isn't the main supplier of everything, but the thing is you can get everything from there. So, you look through here and, you've got this place advertising Highwind. I think Highwind is Taiwanese, usually manufacturer, but whatever, again, knockoffs are a thing. So, I'm not saying that these are authentic, but I mean, you look at, the different manufacturers that can make you linear guide rails, right? And you're going to be able to drive over across town and get pretty much whatever you want manufactured within the same city. Or if you want custom wiring harnesses, right? There's tons of wiring harness manufacturers because, again, that's where all this stuff is made. If you want Molex connectors or JST connectors, you're going to find that all manufactured in this one metro area. It's going to be easy to get. It's going to be cheap. I mean, look, the Made in China website, the Alibaba stuff, that's not exhaustive. Those are just the places that are catering to, the United States or Europe or English-speaking markets, right? The website's in English. So if you're there and you actually, can interact with the local manufacturers, there's going to be tons of supplies just right in this area. And so when we talk about, these other companies like Prusa or Ultimaker, people located in the United States, it's so hard to compete even if you can match the labor costs, even if you have really smart people, because it's not just labor costs, it's not just intellectual property, it's logistics, right? You're still probably going to have your PCBs shipped over. And again, maybe you're doing your own pick and place, but I mean, getting PCBs made in North America kind of expensive. Getting them made in Europe, kind of expensive. So you can get them made much cheaper in Asia, specifically made in Shenzhen, and have them shipped over usually cheaper than you can have them made locally. And then once you take that step to these companies don't even have to have them shipped. So think about how cheap it is to get, PCBs manufactured when they're literally manufactured just 10 miles away. It's going to be so cheap to make stuff in this area. And so I just wanted to point out, the geography of 3D printing is really, it's all about Shenzhen. Whenever you talk about consumer 3D printers, they're all made pretty much in one city. And there's a reason why. It's because it is so cheap to make electronics in this area because they have all the stuff to make it just right there. Every component manufacturer you can think of will be located just down the street. And it just makes it so cheap, so fast, so easy that it's going to be really hard for anybody else to compete at the lower consumer end. And I mean, even the mid-tier consumer end. I'm saying below $2,000. It's going to be awful to compete with any of these companies located here simply because they have such a production cost advantage. And it's not just labor. It's not just because intellectual property is being violated here. It's because they really do have manufacturing advantages that are difficult to overcome. And this goes for everything, right? This is why drones are made here, why cell phones are made here, why all your electronics are made here. And so again, I just wanted to make this video, and I know this is probably a video that a lot of people are like, yeah, duh, water is wet. Asian manufacturing is tough to compete with, but I did want to drop in just a little bit more about the agglomeration economy that is Shenzhen, right? That it is difficult to overcome, tough to beat, and I don't know that anybody, right? I talked about Prusa in that last video, but look, I don't know how anybody competes with them long term. The only reason that, a lot of the other companies that are located in Europe and the United States can make it right now is because they do have intellectual property rights, because you can't just steal everything. But a company, to enforce their intellectual property, has to be big enough to be able to afford to pursue, suing people that rip them off. And so that's why typically you're going to see industrial-oriented 3D printers being manufactured in the United States or Europe or outside of Asia. And even a lot of those companies are getting a lot of their components from Asia. The motors, the linear guide systems, the PCBs, a lot of that stuff is still made internationally and then shipped over. But what production can happen is typically going to be focused on that upper end where there are big enough profits, big enough margins, and enough money on the line to guard against intellectual property theft and to warrant paying to have all that stuff shipped. Because again, it's just so expensive to ship all that stuff when you're competing against somebody that just has to ship it down the street. And so that's going to be the end of this video. Again, I know it's probably nothing novel. It's nothing that you haven't heard before. But again, some people may not be aware of just how concentrated the industry is. So I just wanted to give you kind of a visual perspective on just how densely packed all the 3D printing that you're mostly aware of is, right? It is all concentrated mostly on just one city. So as always, if you got feedback, feel free to leave a comment below. That's all I've got for you.